My name is Peter Terrace, and we're going to be talking today about the Indigenous issue in Canada. And I have Margot Terrace here, who happens to be my daughter and someone who's learning more about this Indigenous issue, and hopefully going to be asking questions and offering her insights into the human condition and human dignity and individual freedoms, and how it impacts the Indigenous people who are currently living on reserves. We just had Truth and Reconciliation Day on September 30th, and there was a tweet that was put out by the leader of the PPC, Maxime Bernier, and I just want to read it out to you here because I find it quite interesting. He said, "On this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, let's remember that no bodies were found, that the residential schools genocide, in air quotes, is a hoax, and that reconciliation requires an end to the BS, the victim mentality, the fake white guilt, and the grifting based on it." So he did catch some blowback on that one, just because people were accusing him of being uncaring. But actually, there was nothing untrue that he stated. There was no bodies that can be that were found at this Kamloops school. There was no murders that were found to have occurred of children. And this is the claim that Truth and Reconciliation is making. They're making the claim that children were murdered or killed. But if you're murdered or killed, you have to be killed by someone. So if 215 children, number one, were killed, it should be a forensic scientist should be able to, quickly determine, yeah, this is a human body and there's 215 of them. None of that evidence is there because it doesn't exist. Not one single body was found. So it comes to the question, then why is this lie being perpetuated? Well, let's follow the money on this one. $321 million of taxpayer money was put towards finding these bodies. Where did this money go? So yes, the Truth and Reconciliation requires truth first. So the reconciliation, yes, has to happen, of course, because no one's going to deny that the European settlers, when they came and conquered North America and Canada, that they subjugated the natives. This is an absolute true fact. And so yeah, their reconciliation is needing to take place, but it's not going to take place when there are these lies of murder, and especially to the people who worked in these systems. There's teachers and priests and nuns and ministers who worked tirelessly to educate these Native children who came to their schools. Now, if people are going to say, and if there are the antagonists who are going to say that every single teacher and nun and priest was bad, that's an insult to all those people who are working tirelessly. And that's also an insult to everyone who's a Christian today who did nothing wrong and who knows that some of those people must have been doing good work. There's certainly a financial incentive to keep this victim mentality going. Now, the Europeans, and I think the British and the French, when they came here and they colonized Canada, they subjugated the Native Canadians. And because in 500 years ago, let's say, when the natives were here in Canada alone, they lived freely. But their freedom was predicated on their ability to work the land, to build up their land, and then also to defend themselves. Now, remember when we went up to Midland and we went to the place called Ste. Marie among the Hurons? Mm-hmm. Do you remember that place?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it's a great place. And there was a Huron settlement. There was 5,000 Hurons living there. They had built up buildings. They had a whole society. They were farming. They were industrious. They were building up wealth. They were They were subsistence farmers, but they were actually very good at it. There's 5,000 of them. The Iroquois came, raided their village, killed almost all of them. Only a handful of them survived. And so that freedom that they had back then was very much dependent on them being able to defend themselves. Now fast forward to today, what gives us freedom in our society? It's our ability to own private property. That's a huge one. Ability to choose how we worship our God. Ability to educate our children how we see fit. Ability to earn a living how we see fit. When you give people money in order to prevent them or to stop them from working or to stop them from succeeding, where you just give them just enough so that they are enslaved to you, that's essentially what is happening with the Indigenous population in Canada. And we have to make amends for that. I believe that is what we have to make amends for that. And have you read the PPC policy on Indigenous issues?
I have not.
So yeah, it is a policy that absolutely upholds the human dignity of the Indigenous people, protects their freedoms, protects their individuality by encouraging private property ownership, by encouraging them to not be dependent on the Canadian government for survival. Because when we colonized the French and the British, we created these reserve systems, and it might be worthwhile to talk about these reserve systems and how they're set up. So when you live on a reserve, let's say there's 100 people living on a reserve and there's 100 houses. Each family doesn't own their own house. What they own is they each own an equal percentage of every house on the reserve. So your family, like if you're living in a house, you don't own the house, you only own a portion of the house, but you own all the houses on the reserve. So everybody owns a little bit of everybody else's house. So consider, if you're living in this house that you don't own and your water stops working, you're supposed to go to the chief, who then delegates someone to fix your water. What we're seeing on these reserves is that people don't have the motivation to fix the water because it's not their house. So they delegate that to the chief, who has no motivation to fix the water either, because they're getting a lot of money, and the more money, the more victimhood they have, the more money they get. So they're not motivated. In fact, they're motivated to keep things in a depressed state perpetually. So how do you break out of this? You have to break out of this by saying this system is the part of the reason why the people who are living on these reserves are being subjugated, whose freedoms are being minimized because they don't have the ability to own their property. Now, if they own their house,
yeah, would that be like a proposed solution? Like all those people that are currently living in the house, that they got ownership of the house and like some land as well?
So we don't have specifics on that, but I think that makes sense. If they're living in a house, then they should be able to get ownership of that house rather than continuing to throw money year after year, billions and billions of dollars, and in fact, nothing is getting better. In fact, it's getting worse. The more money we give as taxpayers, the worse it's getting. So what we ought to be doing is saying, okay, you live in this house. This is now your house. It is your responsibility to maintain it. You want to sell it, you're free to sell it. You're free to keep it. You're free to rent it out. You're free to do whatever, because it's your house. That makes far more sense, rather than creating these little communist communes that nobody owns their own property, but everybody owns everyone else's property in common. We have tested communism throughout all of history, and it has never worked. The free market, private property ownership, this has time and time again proven to be the greatest wealth generator ever, and it also is what respects the human dignity of the individual. So I think that is part of the issue. So yes, there needs to be some reconciliation for how we set up these reserve systems and how we forced the natives to accept this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you think about that, Margot? Like, if you were a native and you were forced to, it really was no choice for
Well,
them,
like,
I think.
on the surface, it seems like a good idea because, you get to live with all the people who have the same beliefs as you, and, like, you have the hope of working together with them. But it seems like in reality that's not the way that it's playing out, and because, well, just
Well, the reality,
I guess there has been studies that show that people, when they don't own the property that they're living in,
Mhm.
or the house that they're living in, that they care less for it. Like, even when they take, like, renters versus people who actually own the property that they're on, the people who own the property, almost every time, of course there are exceptions, they take care of the property better than those who are renting or who don't own the property.
yeah, and you said something interesting, that they choose to be with the people that they have a lot in common with. But before the settlers, before the French and the British settled Canada, they chose who they live with. They chose their tribes that they chose to be with,
Mm-hmm.
and that was their free choice.
Yeah.
Now they're forced to accept it. Of course, they probably would live with those people, their neighbors, their family, their friends, anyways.
Yeah.
But the difference is when you choose it, but when you're forced to do it in order to get the peanuts that the government gives every month, then they're going to stay there out of a threat that they might lose those peanuts if they move away, or if they break the contract, the reserve contract on which they had agreed to live.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a failed system.
Yeah.
And so yes, there is anger there because they should be the wealthiest people in Canada. They should have the most wealth because they've been here the longest. They would have had the greatest opportunity to exploit the resources, to take advantage of it. But instead, we put them into these situations where they could not succeed, and they cannot succeed even today. It's an impossible situation of anyone on the reserve to accept those living conditions. The ones who succeed are the ones who go outside and don't accept those living conditions, where it's poverty stricken, where it's stricken with despair. The despair is rampant on those reserves because of and that's evidenced by the suicide rate, the drug addiction, the alcohol addiction. So there's so many issues that are tied to that.
I heard as well that they don't have as easy access to things like calling 911. Like, the 911 is less able to come to them than to other areas like the police, so they can't be protected as easily. And I feel like that's something that they should have as Canadian citizens, to be protected from people who are trying to hurt them, and there does seem to be more crime, at least from what I've heard of, like, the missing girls that are on the reserves, and where they can't find them for many months. I'm not entirely familiar.
Yeah, so there's a lot of crime on those reserves.
The red dress.
Yeah, there's a lot of crime on the reserves. Now that was a thing, and a lot of people getting murdered on the reserves, and very little motivation by police or government to solve those murders. Why? Because the reserves and the natives also accepted to be self-policing, self-governing. So that's part of it. So if they're self-governing, it's their responsibility to do that. But there's no one on the reserves who is overly interested in doing that, it seems, or in following up even very serious crimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a problem that's also becoming more widespread even in Canadian society, where we have thefts occurring on large scales, the police not even interested in investigating. Unless it's a murder, they don't even necessarily show up, and if they do come, they might come 2 or 3 days later, even for very serious property crimes. So that seems to be more and more of an issue throughout Canada. But now, if we go back to talk about the residential schools and how the claim of 215 indigenous children were found at this school in Kamloops, BC. Let's assume for a second that this is true, that there were 215 bodies found. Just because 215 bodies were found, it doesn't mean they were murdered. It doesn't mean that they were neglected, because if they were neglected by someone who was meant to care for them, that's murder. So they were either murdered or they died naturally. There's no other option. They may have died accidentally, which is naturally. So there's only two choices here. So if the people who are saying that there needs to be truth and reconciliation, there's 215 children, and that the government needs to pay for these 215 children that were murdered, then who murdered them? This is what we have to ask. Who murdered the 215 children? Was it one individual? Was it multiple individuals? If we assume this false claim to be true, there has to be a single person. Why wasn't it investigated at the time? Why would parents, indigenous parents, continue to agree, if there was a choice, to send their children to schools where they could be murdered? If I knew that there was a school in the area that was murdering children, I wouldn't send you to it.
Yeah, maybe you tell me why would.
Well, I mean, a lot of it was because there was no good education on the reserves. So the parents on the reserves either felt that they could get a better education at these residential schools. Number two, there was not enough money or food to feed them, so they were basically hopeless or helpless. And also, number three, the government stepped in, Child Protective Services stepped in, by force, took the children away from the parents because the parents were either drug addicted or a danger to the children. These were the reasons why children were being taken out of their homes, sometimes by force in the third case, where...
Were they taken by force from loving parents?
Well, from a drug addicted parents or parents who were threatening the children's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it wasn't perfect. Obviously, it was a very bad situation because they were being cleansed of their culture. All their culture was being removed, and that was wrong.
That's not a good thing.
And that was wrong. Of course, that was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also, we have to make amends for that, because we took these children, we told them that their culture was savage and wrong, and we needed to remove that from their minds and from their consciousness. And that would have been wrong, because instead which we should be doing, and we are doing now, is celebrating where they came from, celebrating the good, not celebrating the drug addiction, not celebrating the poverty, but celebrating the good of what came from the reserve system, from their history, celebrating that. And so I think there's a place to find that common ground where we can balance the truth that no bodies have been found with the real need for reconciliation.
Yeah, I do think the Pope, he did apologize for I don't know what the specifics of his apology, but apologized for taking the children out of their homes.
Yeah, and what he would actually be apologizing for, I don't actually know what he apologized for, because how would he know? How would he know what they were, what the circumstances were of the removal of these children? So yeah, not sure why he would apologize or how he would have any information that would make him qualified to make an apology. Is beyond me.
The government apologized as well.
The government apologized. The Catholic Church apologized. When Pope Francis went to northern Ontario or one of the territories, and he did apologize, but I have no clue how he would have the ability to apologize for that, because he would have no knowledge other than what he was told by the government.
Yeah.
And the government is obviously pretty bad at telling truthful information, because they're telling us that 215 children were found at the Kamloops uh, residential school. So they're obviously not a good source of reliable information. So if the Pope was given this information, and that's the only information that he's going by, well, then he's going by false information. So he's making apology of the death of these children who were never murdered. They weren't found. There are no bodies.
So what was it that was found again?
It was okay. So what happened at that Kamloops residential school is that money was given to researchers in order to find, using ground penetrating equipment, so sonar or some sort of equipment like that, where it would penetrate the ground. And so they did this. They walked along a field, and they found that there was a lot of ground anomalies, and that they estimated that there was 215 children buried there. And so they went back, and upon further investigation, they found, and they were able to determine, that that was an old septic field. And the ground anomalies that they found, that they thought were children initially, turned out to be old pipes that were part of the septic system. So this is why we can't find corroborating evidence from a forensic scientist or from a coroner, confirming those 215 children, because there was no children. It was pipes. It was old septic pipes. So why is there no coroner's report on these 215 children found? Because there was no children. There was not a single bone found in that field. And meanwhile, $321 million has been spent on this.
That's a lot of money.
A lot of money. A lot of money. So there's a lot of need for, or a lot of motivation to keep this grift going. And so what Maxime Bernier said was absolutely true. There was no bodies, but it's all about white guilt. So even if we go back to this hypothetical situation where there was a murderer that killed all 215 children, let's say a white priest, a white Catholic priest killed all 215 children, how am I responsible for that? Or how is my generation responsible for that? That's his sin. That's one person's sin, who would have done that. That's not my sin. That's not my guilt. I don't have no responsibility for that. I don't even have responsibility for the mistakes that were made in the past. But what I do have a responsibility is for trying to correct mistakes that were made in the past that are still being manifested today. That is my responsibility. But I'm not responsible for murders that may have been committed, which there was none, or mistakes of policy.
Mm-hmm. There probably was some deaths though in the residential schools, just from,
for sure.
I'm just thinking of the one little boy who was killed at St. George, not intentionally. Like, it was during the time when they still had the physical discipline, and they used the strap, and he was hit and fell down the stairs and tragically passed away. And I guess, would it be the principal that was hitting him? He would be the one that's responsible for the death.
Right. So back in the day.
I'm sure there were deaths that also happened by accident like that, like where they didn't intend for a child to die, and obviously that would be a tragedy. So those would be things, I guess, that would use it. Like, I guess who would be the one reconciling for those, I guess. I don't know.
Well, yeah, sure, there was, the corporal punishment was still a thing during the time of the residential schools. Also, the children that were coming to the residential schools were coming from reserves where disease was rampant. There was very inadequate health care at these reserves. So a lot of these children were very likely coming to them already sick, because there was no way that the parents could take care of them on the reserves. So all these sick children were probably sick when they arrived. Some of them may have gotten sick there, but I can, from what I could see and from what I have seen from current I mean, even today, you have thousands of people living on reserves without running water. And this is in a time of such a technologically advanced age. So 80 years ago, it's absolutely conceivable that things were far, far worse than they are today. So the disease would be far worse for the children living there. So when they come to the schools, they're probably sick to begin with. And they would also probably be, some of the kids would probably be quite wild when they arrive. So they would require corporal punishment, as was the custom of the day. You know, they would inflict corporal punishment as a standard way of punishing children. But they did that even in schools here, normal public schools in Ontario 80 years ago at that same time. So that wasn't something that would have been different. If a priest or a nun or anyone killed a child by corporal punishment, they would have been charged. They would have been charged with murder. That's simple as that.
Yeah.
As they would have, and they would have been in the time, but nobody was charged with that. Any final thoughts on what we've been discussing today, Margot?
I guess just for anyone that knows, has personal stories of maybe abuse or mistreatment in the residential schools, like that we're not undermining that, and that we're not saying that that's not a real tragedy.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That for sure there is suffering that has occurred, and there's still that intergenerational trauma that exists, because if your father or your grandfather was at one of those schools, those stories would be passed on to the next generation and to the next generation. And so there would be this trauma, there would be this mistrust of authority, the white man, the European settlers. So that trust, that has to be rebuilt. And that's something that is real. And that's the reconciliation that needs to be talked about. But it has to be absent of the lies. Because when the lies are there, you can't get to the reconciliation, the true reconciliation that needs to happen. So I think we'll leave it at that. Margot, thanks for coming and joining me with this talk. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.